Welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator of POW, Paul Orselli Workshop, here on Long Island. And I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Janella Watson. At home, just like the rest of us, maybe. So greetings, Janella. How are you today?
Paul, I am doing as well as one can be.
I can't ask for more than that. So,
and it is certainly a joy to join you.
Oh, thank you. So normally the way we start things out is I give it over to the guest to just talk a little bit about their background, since usually the interesting twists and turns in people's career and life path is always interesting. So why don't you start us out there, and then we will launch into today's main conversation.
Sounds like a great plan. So I have worked for the past 2 decades in informal education, bringing play and making and the joy that can come with hands-on, sensory-rich exploration to families in science centers, children's museums, and through children's media. And I started my career at the Cole Children's Museum of Greater Chicago. I spent about 8.5 years at Cole, and it's truly the work that formed my foundation as an educator, helped me kind of explore the tenets of everything from Reggio Emilia and Montessori to project-based learning in a truly hands-on way, and build my own take on museum education and practice. I left Cole and experimented in the for-profit world, running a pop-up for Bounty paper towels called Make a Masterpiece, a creative art studio that invited kids to unlock and unleash their creativity by making a big mess, and then in swooped Bounty to clean it all up. And that kind of foray into the world of guerrilla marketing meets creative enterprise was really a wild education. It had us creating hands-on activities that were offered every 45 minutes, 7 days a week, while attending to the tremendous plumbing issues that came along with the kids flushing all of the Bounty down the toilets. It was really a tremendous experience. In that work, I recognized very quickly that being the lead in that kind of company and organization took me degrees away from directly interacting with the families that I had come to care about so much. And so I found that piece of myself again in work at the New York Hall of Science as the Director of Early Childhood Education. It's where our paths first crossed, Paul. And NYSCI was an environment that really let me be part rogue woman, developing and designing maker experiences for families, for children 18 months through 8 years old, and their caring adults, but also really those experiences around World Maker Fair hosted by NYSCI, and the deep immersion in the maker movement and all of the tenets of materials exploration and early tool use that we were able to provide to our youngest visitors within those spaces were transformative experiences that definitely let me hang my hat as a maker educator from now on. When I when I left NYSCI, I joined Providence Children's Museum as associate director. And um, I discovered a piece of myself that I didn't know would come to shine as something that truly speaks to my educator heart. And it is the deep body of research that Providence Children's Museum has engaged in. Um, I have developed a wonderful working relationship with David Sobel and the Causality and Mind Lab at Brown University. And the experiences and exposures in looking very closely at children's play, at the collaboration between parents and children in the midst of those playful learning experiences, and drawing out from those research experiences the pieces that have better prepared me as a parent, those that speak to museum practice and the invaluable nature of translating that academic research into tangible and real things that we can do as museum educators to enhance our practice and better serve our families. It's a piece of my professional journey that keeps speaking to me over and over again. I left Providence Children's Museum in the fall and have hung my own shingle as a museum education and children's media consultant. I'm still in the very beginning throes of this consulting career, but I've been invigorated by new projects that have me working closely with David Sobel and the Causality and Mind Lab, continuing that wonderful research, but also diving and dipping into children's media in a new way and exploring all the time how to bring what I'm learning in the wider education world back into museum practice and back into the fold of how we can better serve families in our community.
Awesome. Well, you, as many of our museum peers, have worn many hats in many places, but where you just ended up is a good segue, families and communities. Although I was going to say just quickly, as a fellow consultant, you're always in the throes, you know, always in beta. So good luck with that. We want to take advantage of the many hats and the many facets of your personal and professional journey as a parent and as an educator to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how museums and other cultural institutions might be able to better serve families and their communities with a mind towards really serving not only as educational resources, but to help better promote equity and social justice in a positive way. So that's a nice meaty, that's a nice, that gives you, you can hook into that sort of broad topic anywhere you would like, but maybe.
Paul, conversation or dissertation?
Yeah, well, we'll start with a conversation. You, as people can already tell, you are so well spoken. You are up to the task. So, but you know, broadly, how to be better resources and better partners for communities and families. What are some initial thoughts?
Well, I think that the first place that my mind goes, Paul, when thinking about the question that you just posed is appreciating and understanding the reality of our current situation. Museums are undoubtedly in a moment of wild uncertainty. it is, and it's not only about when we are going to be able to reopen our doors and how we do so safely, but a budding conversation I've um, that I've been engaged in with my peers in children's museums and science centers especially, but in the broader cultural institution world, is we've spent the past 50 years um, advocating for the best and strongest ways for children to learn. We know all about how important hands-on exploration of materials, tools, and ideas genuinely is to children's healthy development. In children's museums and science centers, we've put that at the center of the experiences that we provide for families. And we have found ways to engage whole families in those experiences so that caring adults can take away from those museum visits things that they can practice and try at home, at the neighborhood park, and in other spaces, in order to genuinely support their children's healthy learning through play. And one of the kind of critical questions that colleagues and I have been posing to each other as we develop new protocols for sanitization and safety within our museum environments is, how do we make things safe and accessible for now without losing that core of what we know are the best ways for children and families to learn. And I don't have any quick fixes and answers to that question. I think that as a museum community, it is something that we need to hold at the center of the conversations that we're having. And also keep in mind that we have not only advocated for those ways of being within science centers and children's museums, but have also dedicated a lot of time to encouraging other cultural institutions, art museums, and botanical gardens, and the rest to open their doors to families, especially those with young children. So many of our cultural institutions are for whom those practices are not deeply embedded and ingrained in their museum culture, are at risk of just honestly kind of cutting off the pieces, closing any, hands-on early childhood spaces that they've created, minimizing their the exposure and risks that come along with those juicy, sensory-rich opportunities that we know are so essential for families to enjoy.
I was going to say one of my least favorite terms related to cultural institutions and museums that has come out of the COVID-19 pandemic is the notion of a completely touchless museum. I mean, we obviously, as you indicated, and certainly as I and everyone else recognizes, we need to be mindful and respectful of people's legitimate concerns about health and sanitation, as you mentioned, but just covering up all the touch screens and taking away all the hands-on interactives and adding more hand sanitizer stations isn't quite the kind of experience that really, I don't think, will make people enthusiastically want to return to museums, but that there we are. So you touched on something which I think is interesting because children's museums, obviously, it's in the name. They are concerned with children and families, children and their adult caregivers, of course, and science centers, obviously, big interactive elements. But there are, as you mentioned, other types of museums, which are awesome museums that we still want families to visit. So what might be your suggestions? And this might be suggestions to schools or neighborhood community centers who want to be more responsive to the educational and social developmental needs of children and families that they're part of, the communities that they're part of. I'm just wondering, you know, like what could be a couple of things that people could latch on to instead of saying, oh no, we need to put all of that away and just buy more hand sanitizer. So
yeah, you know, it is. I think that one of the key pieces that I am thinking of first is asking our communities what they need from us right now. Um, it is easy for us to assume as institutions, especially those that are deeply entrenched in our mission and our vision, that that just opening our doors and increasing the sanitization schedule in our exhibits, taking a few consumables off of or manipulatives off of the museum floor, is the key way to get us back in business and welcoming visitors through our doors. I know that as a parent myself, while I have my own hesitations about sending my child back into a classroom environment, that I'm honestly pining for those museum experiences even more so than I am for my kiddo to be back in the classroom this fall. And the reasons why are, it is within those museum experiences, those experiences where he is learning, kind of thinking with his hands, that he's also working in collaboration with me as his adult caregiver, with friends and with peers in the museum environment. And so, the first key piece, I think, is asking our members and our community partners in this moment what they need, understanding how we can best leverage the resources that museums have, not only in getting families back into our galleries to explore and to play, but also I see some children's museums, science centers, art museums attending to a whole host of needs that their communities are expressing. So leveraging the space that we have, leveraging the expertise of our staff to create rich online experiences, if that is what our audiences are telling us they want and need. I see a lot of museums kind of exercising their resources to ensure that they get a multitude of lesson plans, on their website and into the YouTube universe. But we are not necessarily taking a critical look about how those activities are received by families and if they are inspirational or aspirational in terms of what we are putting out there. I know, a piece of the struggle that I'm having as a parent right now is even with the expertise born over a long career and being a seasoned educator, I am, Paul, I'm tired of playing. And there's only so much live action Mario that I can really engage in. And these 5 months have definitely stretched um, my own kind of limits in terms of that kind of rich engagement and fostering those social skills with my kiddo. Um, and so um, if my museum were to ask me what I need right now, I would say that my family needs opportunity to engage and interact in safe ways with other families. I'm pining for my kiddo to have, conversation with other 7-year-olds and to get to explore and experience with them. Um, and in developing new ways of navigating our spaces, there's a lot of conversation about limiting the number of visitors within our environments, making sure that we're still providing those opportunities for kids and family units to interact with each other, I think is a key piece um, that again, I'm pining for as a parent, and I would drive long distances to any museum that is making that happen.
Well, I think that social aspect of museums, where they can really be community connectors and people connectors and family connectors, what have you, um, especially now. It's interesting. Maybe more at the beginning of the pandemic, there was always this, one of the key sort of social health suggestions was social distancing. But it's really more about physical distancing. Like you need to say, look, we don't want to crowd a whole bunch of people together indoors and be yelling and so on, breathing on each other, to spread out. But that's physical distancing, not social distancing. And I think the resources, whether online or in person or in some hybrid way, how can museums build up this be a social connector? And so just something else you said just struck me, and it might be the things that the communities that a particular museum serves don't immediately and naturally come to mind after reading the mission statement. So, for example, a museum in the UK, which I just thought it was a great idea, they started stocking home goods, like eggs or, I don't know, dishwashing soap, whatever thing, so that they were nearby to people and could provide something that people really needed at that point, and maybe an opportunity to just come in and have even some basic human interaction, So I think that social connector aspect, and I would dare say, I think what you said also in terms of really how can we be a bridge and a connection that way to find out what the communities, the visitors that we serve really need and want right now. It may not be the latest exhibition about elephants or or the Milky Way, even though those are wonderful things. It may literally be, what's a safe way that young children and their adult caregivers can come together and discuss topics of mutual interest, maybe just simply being a gathering place, So I think that's really important, what you just said, that social connector aspect.
I've I've seen some children's museums in this moment reimagining how they utilize their space and how they um, how they become hubs for their communities. In some ways, extending the work that they um, were already practiced in, and in some ways, um, trying 100 little experiments in terms of new ways of engaging community in meaningful ways. Um, Really, I think that in all of the silver linings that we are trying to find in this moment, um, the opportunity to reinvent ourselves and to reimagine how to leverage the resources that museums have in service of um, our community, not only those who we want to invite back into the fold to pay admission and to renew their memberships and to continue to be supporters of our environments, but those in our communities who never knew that the museum was theirs in the first place. How do we, how do we step forward and through this moment in a way that where we are not tackling this as one honking problem that we have to solve, but instead the opportunity for 100 little experiments that in the lowest stakes ways possible help us reinvigorate our practice and find new ways of connecting people together. I saw that a children's museum was working with their local school district as a meal distribution site for families who need that kind of resource and support. And knowing that children's museums, science centers are in the heart of community, strengthening those connections with the other educational and informal educational and community-based organizations, and serving their needs and adopting them in as our own, I think is one way that museums will be able to kind of reinvigorate not only our vitality and sustainability, but become even deeper and richer resources for community as we grow. I was part of an interesting dialogue with I'm now in Providence, Rhode Island, and so I was on a panel with the amazing executive director of the Newport Preservation Society that runs the Newport Mansions, and um, and such a critical piece of that dialogue, that was a little bit of an aha moment for me, was um, in the arena of what decisions children's museums, cultural institutions, historical sites are having to make right now about our financial um, uh, livelihood, about keeping our doors open or reopening our doors. And it makes our basest instincts in terms of who to invite in first become those who can afford to make that happen, re-engaging our donors and making sure that they are top of the list and have great experiences in those first weeks and months that we reopen our spaces. But recognizing that we are also in this intense moment um, of social unrest and an opportunity for each of us as institutions to take stock of where we are from a social service and a social justice perspective. Um, Fighting against those instincts to open our doors first and only to those who can afford to cross our thresholds is truly it's truly the work that we have to be poised to do right now. And it means that we are, I think back on what I learned at the New York Hall of Science about authentic community engagement. And it's not only about lowering the barriers to entry. So it's not only about thinking about when we can reinvigorate and revive our museums for all participation and invite in communities who we know haven't historically felt that museums are theirs, but also, so not only about lowering those barriers, but extending new and renewed and fresh invitations in. And one of the, getting back to kind of the core piece of our conversation about engaging whole families is, I not only want my local museum to be open again and ready for me and my son to explore, but I also, as a parent, need something different right now than I ever did. And it is interaction and engagement with other parents. It's also a window into how to help my child in his own experience of this moment. So in a recent conversation I had with the lovely folks at Sesame Workshop, as we were talking about what families need in this moment, what teachers need in this moment, a key piece of our conversation was, I as a parent want to better understand how to support my child through this traumatic experience. We are all experiencing trauma, relatively speaking, in this moment, and the impacts on all of our kind of healthy development and growth through this moment can actually be enhanced and helped by what so many of my museum educator friends know and are practiced in. And so if it's not, tossing our lesson plans up and and videoing interactives that parents can do at home in order to make what those experiences that we are not having in museums come alive, in our backyards or in our kitchens. It's also the rich resources that Providence Children's Museum, New York Hall of Science, Cole, and others that communities have been a part of in helping parents see the learning that happens through play, and giving them kind of just a few helpful hints. The team at Providence before I arrived, Susie Letourneau, Robin Meisner, they had created an incredible observation tool for families, for parents. And it was an invitation for parents to look closely at their children in play and notice when their child set their own goal in their play, when they, were playing collaboratively with a peer, and kind of all of the goodness and juiciness that comes from those interactions. And so not only like plying families with activities and ways to turn on that, hands-on exploration of materials and tools at home, but new ways of looking closely at our children and what they're engaged in, and highlighting the benefits of that kind of play, even when we cannot provide it in this moment in the same way in our museum environments, I think would be just a key piece of sharing what we've got and the goodness of what we've learned in the museum fields more broadly, and in a moment where it's more critical than ever for families.
Well, and that may just be a good place to end this conversation on a positive note. I think I'm tempted to call this conversation, when we wrap it up, 100 little experiments. I think that notion of just looking for these small engagements and looking for these small connections and looking for these small sort of manageable sized approaches and try something new, but it doesn't seem like this. We're writing our mission statement. Right now, we're gonna completely solve, the entire equity and social justice problem. That's kind of like looking at Mount Everest and thinking you're gonna get there in one jump. I don't know that happens, but the idea of 100 little experiments really resonates with me, and I think it is a nice way to really reinforce all the things that you've been discussing. The idea of being a connector and a social hub for families, children, and their adult caregivers.
I'll tell you, it's extraordinary to think of what work in science centers and children's museums has taught me about healthy risk-taking, and definitely breaking down these daunting challenges into bite-sized pieces is one of the practices that I've employed as an educator since the beginning, and it is something that honestly is renewing my own practice and helping me find the wonder and the joy in the little experiences and experiments that I can create.
All right. Well, my friends watching, we're gonna give you that takeaway to look for some of those 100 little experiments in your professional and personal lives. And also, Janella, you mentioned a host of interesting organizations and resources, which, as we say in YouTube land, we will try to include links and references in the description below, but to help maybe jumpstart some of those ideas for 100 little experiments, and to really get people to think maybe both big picture, but also little picture. I think that's really great. Well, Janella, I really appreciate you taking the time today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I'm really happy you could take the time.
Always a joy when our paths cross, Paul. Thank you very much for including me in Museum FAQ.
Oh, thanks very much. Take care.
Be well.